Hi, everyone. I'm Luke Stickles. Welcome to our online panel about youth volunteering. Just like to acknowledge before we get started that I'm streaming to you from the stolen lands of the Wurundjeri, Boonwurrung and Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and our guests are from the Awabakal people, the Gurungai and Kayimai people. We'd like to acknowledge elders past and present and future, leaders and families from those communities, and we'd like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Would any of you like to add to that? Good. So thank you so much to Volunteer Victorian for hosting this online panel. Great talent and conversations so far. So thank you for the great job, Rosie, Ruby, Tech Adam, and I've been told not to say obsessed with his rock star face. So that happened. Other organisers have done such a great job putting this afternoon on, and I hope everyone's keeping well and safe. Please let me introduce right away our panelists. We're very lucky. I feel lucky. Organising Director of Australian Youth Climate Coalition, Sally Kajola. Hi, Sally. Sarah Rickards of Future Giving and Reunion. Hey, Sarah. And Leadership Coach and Volunteer Management Mentor, Gaston Foucade. How was that?
Brilliant.
Names like good, middle, no, bad. Thank you so much and welcome, gang. Now answer all together at once, like crash the sounds. How are you?
Awesome.
Great.
Fantastic. And just a laugh from Sally, which I assume she's good, everyone. Could be wrong, or often wrong. I want to ask all of you, whoever feels like answering, just generally, how do you find working with young people?
I can go. I find it an absolute privilege and an honor, and I find that their energy is often super contagious, and so it's taught me a lot about who I choose to work with, and are those relationships actually generative and regenerative as opposed to degenerative. How do I feel after being in somebody's presence is something that I'm often asking myself after any interaction. So yeah, more often than not, working with young people is really regenerative and positive.
Great.
They're the bloody best. Yeah. Also, feel like it's an incredible privilege to work alongside young people every day, and I think it's just a really some of the best things that I love about what we get to do as a movement of young people is just have fun and be creative and be silly. Often on things that people often volunteer on things because they really matter to them and they're passionate about it. And sometimes these things are really hard to conceive of or think about how you can have an impact. But if you can have some fun and be creative along the way, and young people often have great new ideas about what to bring to those spaces. Yeah, it's bloody awesome.
Gaston.
Yeah, I love working with young people. Actually, I don't know. I've been part of volunteering projects since I was 12 or 13. So always with young people. Me being part of I consider myself young people. So I really enjoy working with the youth.
I didn't know if you were young or you were just one of these people not aging, Gaston, and I didn't, rude to ask. I don't know.
I'm 31.
Thank you very much. And Sally, can you tell us a bit more about the kinds of things that you've found in your experience that young people respond to? What kind of qualities or what kind of vibe are people wanting to get involved?
Yeah, so I guess for context, so I work for the Australian Youth Climate Coalition. So we're a movement building organisation, and we see our mission is to inspire, educate and empower young people to take action to fight for climate justice. And so we do that through training programs and then running strategic campaigns so the peaks that they can have impact. And so our organisation wouldn't exist without our volunteers. It's a core part of who we are and the way that we believe we have the impact in the world. And the things that have we constantly come back to why do people volunteer? They're usually looking for three things. One is to make a difference or to have an impact on something that they care about, and they need to have a pathway for them to do that and them to draw a connection with the actions that they take. Is creating a change in the world. They want it for social connection. So for us, it's like meeting like-minded young people. Often young people, particularly in like some communities, might feel like no one around them sees the world the way that they do or really cares about this thing. And they'll come to events with us and be like, oh my goodness, like I've just met, 10, 20, hundreds, thousands of young people who see like the world as I do and want to create change. And they also want to learn something. So they want to learn something about the issues or how they can have an impact, learn new skills, and be able to kind of grow as humans in that way. So I think they're really important things to ground yourself in, and when you're like working with volunteers too. It's not about like ticking boxes or whatever. Often people in the work we all do are coming here because they care, and we have to invest in them as well, so that they're getting things out of the opportunity.
100% agree. And maybe Sarah, can I ask you, like, what kind of things do volunteers like? What's the young people get talked about a lot. What are some of the ways that young people get like grouped or characterized that are these sort of not accurate notions? And how does your work with young volunteers, how does that actually how's that demystified and sort of updated some of those ideas and shown them to be so wrong?
Oh wow, there's a bit in that.
There's a lot. Throw to Gaston or back to Sally at any time.
I will. So, and interrupt me if you want to add anything here. But I think that there's, one big misconception, and there's that, there's like the younger generation, and I've met so many younger people that are so much more wise and mature than I am, and so I think that is definitely part of it. And then I just think about like age as a spectrum as well. We often talk about, the younger generation coming in and saving us. And that's a really big narrative that, we've been told since, we're pretty much being young children. And then we kind of end up in this gap in the middle where we're not part of the narrative anymore. And it can be a little bit discombobulating and not seeing your part in that. And so what is the aspect of of being, I guess, transitioning into eldership and mentoring, but still maintaining a sense of humbleness that these younger people that are emerging into the space actually might have better solutions and answers than we do as well. And just finally to add into that is like, what is that reciprocal relationship that we can have with younger generation volunteers or volunteers in general, and how are we helping those individuals get to where they would like to get to? So a lot of my volunteering experience comes from working in the university sector, and so those individuals are very keen to volunteer so that they could then put it onto their resume and go out and get a job and just gain those skills and have those safe places to practice and fail. Like we don't often have places where like dojos where we can learn and fail and pick up those skills, and so I think that that's a really important aspect of it as well.
That's a great answer. And Gaston, would you like to add anything to that?
I keep thinking about young volunteers, and I think I shared some of this idea not so long ago, but it's curious because for me, young people and volunteering is like synonyms. It's like
why is that, Gaston?
Maybe because back I'm from Argentina, and maybe I think now there's studies around this, but most of the volunteers back home and actually in South America are like people between 18 to 30 years old. So for us, it's more usual to see young people volunteering than elders or people in their, 40s, 50s or whatever. But it's like we are more used to see young people getting involved with the society. Maybe different topics because of the issues and the emergencies are different. But yeah, that's why.
Yeah, good one. I always like probably my work with volunteers and time being a volunteer or managing a program, I've just found that most people consider themselves young at heart, no matter what age they are. And there's way more of a universal experience being had. And like I think you mentioned, Sally, that like being with a group of people where you already have like-mindedness is so regenerating. And to your point, Sarah, gives me back energy of oh wow, I can relax. Like, this is so much different to some of my old school friends, like hanging out with, even though I maybe don't know those people as much. Now, speaking of having a dojo to train in, what kind of volunteer work's still going in during this sort of shutdown period? I love that idea of dojos. to, labs and stuff, right?
I can jump in. So I guess I haven't seen like too much change as opposed to like everything's moving online. And so one of the main things is people wanting to volunteer with their actual skills, and people coming in and actually questioning, what is this job or this university degree or this thing that I'm kind of rushing back to, and how do I align to my purpose and what I actually want to be doing here. And so I think that's the biggest thing that I've seen change, although I know it doesn't completely answer your question. It's like people now have this space to really practice that, their gardening and their sewing and all of these we're seeing a lot of people like, this big sourdough movement and things like that, and sharing food with neighbors. And so there's a beautiful kind of realignment and re-questioning of what we're meant to be doing here in these beautiful and magical and crazy neat human suits.
Do you think when we go back to volunteering on projects in person, we'll all pause a bit and wait for the lag to make sure the person we're speaking to in real life has finished? Do you think we'll carry over some of these WebEx traits maybe?
I'm really as a recovering scientist who sort of uses the world as my own laboratory anyway, I'm really curious around the transformation and cultural transition that we'll see as a result of all of this. And so I will be looking out for that lag in my research.
And Gaston or Sally, what volunteer work do you still find going on, and how is it going strong? What's working in this period of restricted and real social changes?
With the programs I've been working on, many of course have been struggling with people that not wanting to go out of their house, of course. So there's a lot of online stuff and running conference and just running events online and doing contact volunteer to volunteer to catch up and just to follow if they are still engaged, because many of the volunteer managers I've been working on worrying about their volunteers not coming back, and this is just it's a time to check on what we are doing and see what's really necessary. There's also many programs that sometimes have too many volunteers and maybe they need less, and sometimes volunteers that are doing a particular task, and this is the perfect time to reconsider and choose again and decide where they want to go.
So kind of debriefing and strategizing, hey? Sometimes the work that needs to be done can just take precedence, and I've been in programs where things have gotten a bit reactive sometimes. And so is this obviously it's a horrible situation and people's health and lives are at risk, but is there an opportunity for that kind of stepping back and re-strategizing, and or is that sort of, what do they call, lipstick on a pig?
No, yeah, and I've seen I haven't heard that before, but and I've seen
don't do anything I do. Don't adapt any of my things at all. Sorry.
Don't worry. No, and what I've seen these last days is, how in volunteering we find new things we can do maybe out of our careers, and volunteering is an opportunity to do new stuff, because it's just okay, there's people needing someone to cut the grass. I haven't done it before, so I can do it, and it's just volunteering, but then it turns into something else. And I've seen a lot of people going back to their skills, and because they are at home and maybe they can only use their skills through a webcam or by calling someone. So I think a lot of people going back to their skills and what they have to offer, instead of just seeing what they can find out there.
Yeah. And go on, sorry.
I think it's been a bit different for us. Young people have broadly been impacted, arguably in a bunch of ways, basically that they've never really seen in their lifetimes, right? We're living through a global crisis, and young people, for many of them who have jobs, work in the hospitality industry, which has been one of the industries that's been completely gutted. A lot of people might be living away from home for the first time if they've finished school, and suddenly they're trying to pay bills and rent and navigating systems with little support. And so for us, it's actually been and it still will be, and I think for a while, a really long learning curve, and really needing to adjust our plans and our expectations of people and really listen to where people are at. And it has also been a moment that I guess has highlighted a whole bunch of like the intersectional ways different crises play out and like disproportionately affect some communities. And so some of the communities that we work with, for example, communities of colour or in regional communities have been like, again, disproportionately impacted by this too. And that has also meant needing to slow down and adapt to where they're at, but has also meant as an organisation, we've committed to working to get our volunteers behind the work of some other groups who are working with those communities. So, for example, Democracy in Colour, People of Colour organisation is running a campaign around folks with temporary visas and other things not being able to have access to healthcare, and then also being at risk from, being deported or whatever, and having their lives completely turned upside down. And so we're kind of using it as a moment to live our values truly, and not just to work directly on our issues, and give our volunteers pathways to do that. But we've also seen it as a time to invest in leaders and do some of those things that maybe can take some more time or harder to work in when you have a campaign, which is the type of organisation we are moving along. And so we've, in the last 4 weeks, completely scaled up a huge training program with 6 different streams, and it's all been online, which is a fairly new thing for us. And we're just trying to really invest in people at this time and do a bunch of the stuff that can sometimes be left to the wayside, that hopefully helps people build their skills and knowledge at this time and be able to use that now, and then even more broadly, I think, when things start to change. But it's been interesting to see when some people come back, or what is also bringing new people in, and it's always varied.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sally. There's a beautiful segue to our next question about coming back, but I do want to go quickly to Sarah, who's watching our stream, who commented, and I'll read this out. You keep mentioning young people as though the future of volunteering is only with them. Don't you think there's a future for older volunteers as well? Yes, you bet. Who wants to comment? Let's go.
I do. This is absolutely about everybody. I found that the theme of this panel is focusing on younger people.
Right.
But in that, I think that that we need to be looking at it in a more holistic sense, and including everybody, and especially for the older generation. Even though I don't really want to label it per se, it's there's so much need there. It's what is the wisdom and the eldership that you can kind of hold in this space, and how can you sort of share your lessons from going through life and volunteering with these sort of younger generations as well, and vice versa. What can those younger people potentially teach you in return? And so we definitely don't want to be saying that it's all about just the younger generation. This is absolutely about everybody. Corona has taught me one thing. Every few months I do this, but I draw a circle on a page, and it represents 24 hours, and I break it up into little pizza bits. And for the first time ever, I actually removed the word work, and I wrote the word contribution. So what is that pizza slice of contribution that I can be offering, and how can I be of service to the world and share my gifts with community? And so that's something that I feel like would be great if everybody could view.
Well, that sounds really delicious. I mean, productive and sensible. Would either of you others like to say anything about that? So the future of volunteering being with young people, and there's some of those stereotypes that are out there that we, as soon as you start doing work in the community, all these stereotypes about demographics really break down, don't they?
Yeah, I agree with Sarah. And also it's I think the future of volunteering is because I don't know, kids bring their families in, or mom brings their kids, and today we are talking about young volunteering and youth because it's important to do, and we could do it about adults as well, and it's the same thing. I reckon when talking about volunteering, it depends. There are some organizations that maybe have only elders or only young people, and usually it's because what they are targeting. And it's a good question to ask themselves, why are you targeting a certain age of people? Because maybe you think, older people has more time, or younger people has more time. And if you're looking for more time, you can just target to anyone, and you can find people with time in any age group. So I reckon when talking about volunteering, it's not that there's one group or one part of the population that it's more responsible. We all have something to do, and we all can get involved in some ways. It's just finding the way.
Yeah. Sally, would you like to add something?
I don't really have anything different to add.
Yeah. I would like to say, if anyone was just watching my, ridiculous video just before we started up here, I love the cross demographics. I mean, everyone votes with their feet, and you end up volunteering with people where people have just opted in because it's important enough for them to be there on time with you, who also arrived on time, and they're the people you volunteer with. And I love that community within a community that happens, that gives that energy back, like Sarah was saying again, and I just love that. And what a great comment and observation, Sarah, out there on YouTube. Thank you so much. Now we'll move on back to sort of casting off from Sally's prior point. What are the keys for organisations to have ready as the shutdown eases off and we're less restricted? What are the keys for organisations to be ready to pivot to that change again?
I could go, and it's the perfect time to do it, and it's usually the first mistake on volunteer management, but I would go full on with the planning. Like, it's the best time to sit down, get a pencil, and just like, because many organizations go with, we need more volunteers, and usually they don't get the right questions on how many do you need, what do you need them for, who are you targeting with, when do you need them, where are they going to work. So now it's the perfect time to understand what your project needs, and like and who are you going to target to, and then like start moving the pieces. Is that the word in English? Moving the like a chessboard.
Yes, sir. The components, right? Like the parts of the parts of the contribution, not the work.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. And I think, often as a campaigner and designer, I think a lot of the things that we do, we can kind of miss aspects and rush things. And so how do we take this time to map out the whole user experience journey and make sure that there's no blind spots? And so are we accounting for diversity and accessibility and all of those kinds of things, and then mapping what the skills are of the volunteers that we already have, and how do we not just focus on getting new volunteers, but how do we support the volunteers that we have already had? So one of the campaigns that I was working on right before this happened was with respect to climate change, and a lot of our volunteer base was very much in the older generation who were most at risk. And so what they were doing, they could no longer actually do for us as volunteers because they were such high risk. And so how do we actually flip that and go, actually, thank you so much, you've been supporting us so much through this, what do you need now? And so making sure that reciprocal exchange is being questioned, and how do we just sit back and question and be curious about everything that we do during this time is another piece as well.
Yeah, reciprocation is such an important concept for me when it comes to volunteering. I'm so glad you said that. What about, I find that program, for program leaders talking up to sort of the rest of the organization, or internally to the rest of the organization, about strategy and what your objectives are and stuff. The language can get very different to when you're addressing your team and you're doing the day in, day out contributing. And there's a rich, on the one hand, you've got this rich experience of human service and working and collaborating together. And then you've got these instrumental ways of talking. And that, that's when it's like, instead of talking about this great shared action that we're doing based on our shared values, and it's very rich and warm, it ends up being talked as like a sector, and you can get into these managerial frameworks and languages. Like, how do you folks all negotiate that? Any funny stories are very welcome at this point. And what do you think's going on there? Any comments?
A whole heap of ego, actually. I think that there's this huge misconception that we have to be, one person in a boardroom in a meeting, and then our authenticity and our humanness is like utterly suppressed, and we've just got caught up in this, like, I hope I'm allowed to swear, but this BS sort of story that we can't be that at work. And so there's a huge focus on like productivity and how do we squeeze the most life out of like our volunteers and all this stuff. And I'd love for that to just be completely washed away through all of this. Like, let's just come back to being humans in this ecology and figuring out how we can just like bring more life to everything that we do, and more meaning, and just cut all of the corporate crap.
I love where you're coming from, but what about when you need to talk to people accounting for the project? Is there a tendency? Do you end up having to fight that tendency in yourself, or no? It's a categorical different thing for you, Sarah.
Yeah, you're right. You know, you do need to sort of, I guess, be able to find the balance of being human, but also being accountable, and somebody that is trustworthy, and, you know, not too kind of, you know, going off with the fairies or whatever. And I think that's a balance that you learn, and it's an interaction that is different with each person as well, and it takes time to be able to get to that point, and just having those heart to heart, human to human conversations with people without the facades.
Anything to add, Gaston or Sally, please?
Yeah, it's funny because I had a couple of meetings last week, and with these volunteer managers struggling with other team members that doesn't like kind of look after the volunteers. And what I was talking with them is like, I think one way to step forward and to find this easier to do is like, forget you are talking about volunteers, you are talking about people. It's the same thing. Is if they get paid or they're not paid, like
roles,
just like asking how are you to someone, it's not because they are volunteering or they are not, and that's probably going to work well for you. So when talking about, if we go back to volunteers, but as I said, I think it's useful for any team building thing. For me, it's about two things. One, it's leadership and your leadership skills, and also how like you work on that with different staff, and you can develop that like lifetime. And the other part is its purpose. It's like, what are you here for? I'm not talking about reason. I'm not talking about why people is coming. I'm talking about purpose. Why are they going to still be here? Why? What are you here for? You know, what are you looking for? What do you want to get?
So, like, do you mean sort of getting back to your sense of purpose can help you overcome that sort of a managerial or sort of dehumanized way of talking about the program? Is something like that?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Totally.
Sally, would you like to add something there? You're in a great leadership position there, and is that incongruity something you can relate to, or at the AYCC, have you actually found a great way to not even get to that place? In a really, I mean, AYCC is such a vibrant organization.
Yeah, when you asked the question, I was like, I don't really find myself in this position, and that's like,
awesome.
Yeah, I feel very lucky. I think, it might be like our whole staff team is under 30. That is like a core part of who we are as an organisation, an organisation led by young people for young people. And many of, if not most of us, have all been a volunteer once, whether with the AYCC or other organisations, and currently doing that. And like I was saying earlier, like our volunteers are our organisation. So actually to have a conversation where I had to justify like investing in a volunteer like, I guess we don't have programs, like we are, we're a movement organisation.
It's holistic, yeah.
So it's not really a challenge I come up against, I suppose, when I need to like work with my team, nor with like the decision makers above. I guess it's like just a core part of who we are. Like obviously it might come through in other, there might be other harder conversations, but it's not really about justifying investing in volunteers. There might be other restrictions, like how do you have a movement that continues to scale and grow, but also like maybe not always a budget that grows to the same scale, like, but yeah, how you're inspiring and building people at the same time. So I can't quite relate. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. I think not being able to relate shows, like that does show quite a bit. That's actually telling. You know what? I think listening to the three of your responses, I think I realized that I wanted to ask a question like that, because most of my volunteer projects that I've worked on have been a lot of cultural change, like a lot of frontline, like big change to like how an organization might do things in a pre-existing way. So I'm being a translator a lot, but if you're buying in and you've got a very sort of holistic, overarching, strong culture, then you don't need to divide yourself that way. I'm not sure. Or maybe I'm just a weird guy who thinks in weird ways. Hey, so different organizations really factor in volunteer labor to their sort of unique mission and strategic goals and so on. You end up with some organizations in volunteering, like providing care, and there's charities and like these essential services that really, to me, seem to like help people offset the maybe social disadvantage or challenges in their lives, and just helping people. Whereas other missions are more towards like urgent social change, big step change in our society. Are there any comparisons or contrasts you can make between those different types of organizations, experiences, the type of people who step up, or why, or anything like that? Or maybe a really important element that I just left out of that picture?
Opposite to what you're asking, but I think the thing that unites them is that like people usually have a personal connection or story connected to the thing that they choose to take action on that is like their key motivator. And like sometimes people might come to something and maybe have not fully understood why they're there. Like we do this thing called relational organizing, and it often means that you really have like a deep conversation with someone to and understand like who they are and what brings them to do this kind of work, I suppose, or to contribute in this way. And I know even after I'd been volunteering for like a year with the AOICC quite a while ago now, I couldn't really properly articulate my why, and like my why has also changed over time of like what that motivator is. And so, for some folks, they might want to be able to give their time or their energy or their skills to a whole range of issues, but like what is the thing that deeply motivates them most, or that they have a strong connection to? And like for some folks, like they don't arguably feel like they have a choice. So that we have a branch of the AOICC called SEED, the Indigenous Youth Climate Network, which is for young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people. And I don't want to speak for them. Things I have heard though when talking to SEED volunteers, however, has been like, I don't have a choice to be here. Like I need to fight to protect my country and my culture and my dream. So it can be very varied from that versus like my family member has experienced this and I want to help other people not experience that thing in like care industry.
That's such a great contrast. I'm so happy you said that. Sarah or Gaston? And we'll go to an audience question. So yeah, like the care, like charity and care organizations versus urgent social change. Like what are some of those observations that you've had?
I keep thinking about your question because it's something I think I've been thinking since I arrived to this country. Because back home is more like volunteer work is more related to working in slums and poverty related. Like I've been part of projects for 5 to 6 years, building houses all over the country in different slums. And I remember chatting with Sarah like 1 year ago, and she was talking, she was mentioning things like climate change or climate emergency, sorry. And it was like, I haven't heard that I never had heard that before. For us, we think about hunger, we think about like people living on the dirt with cardboard houses. And since I got here, I found a lot of non-for-profits more related to mental health or environmental issues. And if there is something poverty related, it's maybe more linked to overseas. That's what I found so far. I might be mistaken. So talking to different volunteers, I find like the reasons might be different, but at the end, it's like volunteering is about like doing something you believe in. So I'm not sure if that really affects on what they do, but because it's like it's coming from really deep. Then you might find people that just want to make friends and people who just want a picture for the social media or whatever. There's different reasons. But if we go deep, I think like if you volunteer in a mental health related non-for-profit or poverty or environmental, for me it's like you are doing something for a bigger cause, and that's a lot to say.
Well, people can find their identity through service, through volunteering. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I can speak for myself. Like as I said, I started like really young working in
I agree
slums
with myself.
close to close close to my house, and that's how I found out that I wanted to go full on working with poverty related and working in slums, and I did it for around 10 years.
Amazing.
So totally agree with that.
Fantastic. Sarah, what would you like to add?
I'd just like to kind of, I guess, weave a bit of what everyone's been saying together here around, volunteering is a really beautiful way to help people find their purpose. We're asked from such a young age, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I hate that question. I think it's a crap question. What we're going to be when we grow up probably doesn't even exist, and it's so founded in so much ego of prestige of all of these different things. And I'd love for us to start asking ourselves and the younger generation specifically just more beautiful questions of who they want to be when they grow up. And around the volunteering piece, I'd love to also just bring in the aspect of privilege as well, where it's looking at us right now, where we're all, as far as I can tell, we're pretty white and pretty privileged, and so sometimes we can often go to like other countries and be like, oh, I'm going to go and I'm guilty of this, so I'm saying it not as necessarily as a judgment, but as like calling myself up on it, and I'm going to go over and I'm going to help this country with this problem because I have the space to do it. And there's a lot of things that we can be doing here as well, to contribute back to our local communities without having that kind of that white savior ego complex that can sometimes be associated with it as well.
Potential nightmare scenario there. Yeah, absolutely. We've got the P word coming up in a question soon, but I only got to volunteer through my disability and through like, oh, I can't work, I can volunteer. And then I love I love my differently abled comrades that I've sort of met, and they've like helped me understand my health and my limitations and stuff. And I'm so grateful for that. But we're going to come back to the P word, but I'm so glad you said that. I'd like to just put a bit of time. Nathan's asked a great question on the stream in the chat here. Anyone listening in, if you'd like to get your question in, we'll definitely make time for you. And we will shut down the whole stream and just stop Volunteering Victoria in its tracks to make sure we get your question answered. Which I'm sure that's not upsetting anybody right now. Nathan says, I'm Nathan. I live in the youth team at the CFA. I work on the youth team at CFA, and I have the privilege of working with young volunteers and volunteer leaders in regional and rural Victoria. The needs of young people in country areas are often quite different from those in the bigger cities like Melbourne and Geelong. I'd love to get the panel's views on on how organisations can best include and use the skills of young people in country areas. Thanks. And I love that this conversation, we are gradually breaking down this homogenous type, and like Sally's example and story is like broken it down, and Sarah and Gaston also. So what a great question from Nathan. Who'd like to respond?
Firstly, thank you so much for that question, Nathan. I think the answer to your question is more questions. So what does the local area need? What is that place asking to become? I find a lot of answers to myself and the projects that I'm working on by looking into the Indigenous heritage of places. So what were those specific places used for? On a Wabakal country where I am right now, in this specific place, it was a huge food production area. And so, redesigning or regenerating this place to become like that is something that is really key to the work that I do here. And then speaking to the younger generation of volunteers that you have in that place, and what are their needs, and what does it look like with respect to the skills that they might not be receiving through their schooling system or through the community as well, and how can you fill that gap that they're craving or asking for. And even if they don't know what the words are, how do you sit with them and feel into that with them and help co-design that with them, as opposed to making assumptions without having those conversations.
Some great methods as questions, Sarah. I love that. Thank you. So again, the other guys are how to best include and use the skills of young people in country areas.
Yeah, I definitely echo a bunch of what you were saying, Sarah. I think it's a not, you can't have a monogamous approach. And I know, like at the AYCC, our growth in regional areas has like completely grown a lot in like the last 1 to 2 years. And in a bunch of places, that's meant, we've had to slow down and ask questions and sit back and be willing to hear the answers and listen to the answers and respond to the answers as well. And recognizing, I think, often in regional areas, there may be less opportunities to volunteer on something that might be like close to someone's heart or their connection, or less opportunities that for young people volunteering on things that they care about or programs can often have a whole bunch of like on-flow effects to other parts of their lives too. And so really investing in young people in those areas is key. And I think something is like also looking at like resourcing. So like how much resourcing are you putting into big city areas versus regional areas? Like things cost more. You should spend more time there if you can. Can you invest in those young people more? Like what are the things that the city-based young people that are volunteering with the CFA getting because of other opportunities they have or that they don't need from the CFA, but that the CFA could provide these young people in regional areas that they may not otherwise get? Like how can you build up their leadership and empower them through things as well? And it's also meant, we would sometimes be like, we'll provide scholarships for regional folks to come to this training in a regional area and like billet them out and things like that. But whilst that's a good step compared to nothing, actually having a training in that community and doing a whole bunch of other work has such like better on-flow effects. It means that you can tailor the program to what those people need and the way that community wants to go, and not impose that on a community. So I think it's a great starting point to recognize the differences. And sometimes even just like naming that up front, both to the folks in the city and the folks in regional areas, is a really important first step.
And I think some of with Nathan's question, like some of those issues about where young people are at in terms of things you mentioned before, Sally, about housing, living with family, work prospects and further education and stuff are different in the regions than the assumptions that get made in the city. Gaston, would you like to respond to Nathan at all there?
I think they said everything that could be said.
They did. I'm out of bye. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so thank you so much, Nathan. And another question from Sharon as well. Thank you, Sharon. This is a great statement, and I'd love to hear everyone's responses. Volunteering satisfies one's altruism. On the most basic level, volunteering satisfies our need to give of ourselves, to give back. What would you like to say to that? It's a bit of a provocation from Sharon in a way.
Is that written? I need to read it again.
Volunteering satisfies one's altruism. On the most basic level, volunteering satisfies our need to give of ourselves, to give back.
I think that's beautiful. It's like it almost needs to be like a T-shirt or a meme.
A mug.
A mug, yeah. And yeah, I was in a workshop just recently, and Curly, this beautiful Indigenous woman, spoke a lot about basically figuring out like what your gift is, so that you can share it with the world. And I love that, and it reminds me of that, because once we figure out what it is and we can give it back to the world, it does give us that kind of reciprocal dopamine hit and oxytocin hit and all of those things that make us feel good and feel connected. And if there's one thing the world's facing right now, it is a huge disconnection from ourselves, other people, and the natural world. And I don't just mean that in the context of COVID, I mean that in the context of pre-COVID as well, but especially now that's been completely like put into like this pressure cooker, and we're sort of entering through this like portal of a new way of being. And how can we use that to understand our purpose and reconnect at all three of those levels, and probably more levels that I'm not even aware of just yet.
Yes, well said. So there you go. Thanks for that, Sharon. Yeah, Gaston, please.
Yeah, sorry. No, that I totally agree with Sharon. And I was thinking about this classic negotiation management thing when they talk about win-win situations, and I think volunteering is the perfect example. I don't know why people doesn't use it, but it's a perfect example for win-win. It's like you are doing something for a bigger cause, as I said before, and it's definitely, Sarah mentioned the dopamine. I didn't know how to pronounce that in English. And it's like how you feel after doing things for a bigger cause and for something that, yeah, totally agree.
Absolutely.
Could I make a comment? Something you were saying, Sarah, just made me think of something earlier, kind of going with where our conversation's been around how like volunteering for some can help us find our purpose, or we can grow through it or whatever it might be. And in the theme of like this being a bunch about young people, like young people are at that critical point in their life when they're like trying to work out who they are, whether that's a 15-year-old or a 20-year-old or a 25-year-old. You know, there's so many different things that we're trying to work out when we're young people. And I just think like where people have the ability to give something, to volunteer, it's really important to remember that, but also to think about like how much this can help grow and shape someone at this like really important part in their life. Like, not to say that that doesn't happen throughout one's lifetime, but it's like quite a pivotal point in one's life where you're finding or starting to navigate who you are with more freedom and control yourself than you might have when you were, say, in primary school or something like that.
It kind of builds agency, doesn't it? It makes people, oh, I didn't know I could do that. Now I feel like I could do anything. Which actually every AYCC person I met has come out. I can see the I can see the effects.
That's
I used to have
I'm here today. Like I you know, for so long, like I've had a very privileged like upbringing, but you know, there's that story that like young people don't matter. You don't have any power, you can't influence anything. And then like I came across the AYCC, I joined, and then I had the experience where I was like, I was walking the halls of Parliament House, lobbying politicians, and we were like winning significant things like renewable energy policies. And I wouldn't have believed you if I told you I could do that like 2 months earlier, let alone years earlier. And so, yeah, I think it's a really critical point that you can build people up to realize like their own agency, to challenge some of the things that society can say more broadly, no matter who you are and what age you are, but even more so I think when you're younger.
People step up in amazing ways, and people just get to a stage of their lives, whether they're, you know, young, middle-aged like me, or older than I am, and people say people are just ready to develop in a particular way at a particular time based on that kind of stimulus and opportunity from their service and their volunteering, and I deeply love and appreciate that. Now, we've got one more set question, and I want to quickly ask everyone if they'd like to sort of make a final comment, because we're going to finish right up on 4:30. So we've got 5 minutes for that. So I just want to go back to the P word. Recently, Resources and Water Minister Keith Pitt, unfortunately named, they recently called out climate change volunteers as cashed up activists who hold up mines, dams and deforestation simply because they can afford to. Now, that's not all volunteers, of course, but what are your views on who gets to volunteer? Does the sector acquire spare time that comes from privilege, which we've touched on? Or actually, is it the demand for charity and activist organisations and causes so urgent that people make that time happen, no matter what their circumstances are? I guess it boils down to, how does class impact volunteering?
It's a huge question, but I'm feeling like pretty triggered and angry about it.
Do it.
I mean, we can't afford not to. You know, I personally have spent the last 3 years since leaving my corporate job donating over 50% of my time each year to climate change, because the future terrifies me in terms of the trajectory that we're currently on. And I say that as a scientist and not as an alarmist, but yeah, I think that things like that getting out into the media is a very very dangerous. And I think that there's another piece around like the shame of privilege as well. Like, how do we actually empower these people that do have the time and the space and the extra cash to be able to, like, a lot of these campaigns that we run, you know, there's people, there's huge donors supporting them and going, you know what, like, I really want to contribute. I want to be a part of this thing, and I also happen to have money that I can put towards it because I've started to look back at my life or whatever, and I've got kids, and I really want to secure a safe future for them. So I think it's all of those narratives are very, very dangerous, and I think privilege, we need to also be redefining how we think about privilege.
What a great statement.
I think that in a lot of ways that like formal volunteering can exist here, it can be an incredibly privileged thing to do. Like, I was able to volunteer because of the inherent privilege that I have personally, and it shouldn't be that way. I think there's, in some circumstances, that may not change, but there's certainly a whole bunch of different lenses of privilege around race, class, and so many other things that can prevent someone's ability to volunteer their time. And so, you know, our organisation still, you know, we've made a bunch of progress. I've just been evaluating a bunch of our work around this for the last few years has increased, but like we have a hell of a long way to go, and like actually we can't hide behind that. And I think the question to ask isn't just like, how do you diversify like your movement? It's like, how do you remove barriers to people volunteering? How do you change what volunteering with your organization looks like so it can appeal to other people, and volunteering doesn't look like X thing. Like, you know, earlier on when our movement was smaller and things were involved, like people were volunteering 2 days a week of their time. Like, that's not sustainable for a movement that grows. It's also like unrealistic, and it's also a huge barrier. But people can have, there's leadership that comes in many different shapes and forms. And meeting people where they're at and actively working to like say, okay, we see these barriers, we're going to remove them, and listening to people and doing a whole bunch of cultural change is really important. So that means like investing in the education of your staff and your volunteers too, around like, you know, doing anti-oppression training and all different things too, because that actually shows that you're living that value, and people need to, like, I've had to do a bunch of work, and I will continue to do work for the rest of my life to like learn and educate myself about that too, in order to make sure that, you know, the work that we're doing is for everyone. Like, we talk about having a generation-wide movement at the AOICC, but like our movement isn't currently generation-wide, and like who can really be involved, and like we have to work to change that, because if we're not, then we're failing at our mission.
Yeah, sure.
And like the vision of the world we're trying to create.
That's very well said. Now, we've just got 1 minute left. Gaston, please give us the final word.
In 1 minute for that? Oh,
yeah, man. No pressure. Except
no
time.
pressure. Challenge accepted. Yeah.
Just TikTok, dude. TikTok.
Okay. I missed it when you said 1 minute.
I'm just kidding. I'm sorry.
No. I'm like, when I think about this privilege, it's like, I think when organizations feel they only had one certain group of society being part of them, it's probably like they should think on what conditions are they asking their volunteers to, like, sometimes, I don't know, I've been part of project that they ask volunteers to pay a certain money, and I don't know here, but back home it's not a possibility for everyone. And also when you ask someone to travel and to go somewhere, it's like, are you thinking it like something everyone could do? And it depends on your programs, it depends on your vision. And talking about privilege, is like, I feel this country, for the ones coming from South America, it's a privilege. It's like we feel like living in a movie. So so it's like every time I see these programs and people involved in it, it's like, keep doing it, because you have a lot of things like already been taking control. You can put your energy to something else.
That's a really great way to say it, and you handled that pressure so well, Gaston. Thank you. And I'd just like to add Sharon's comment. here. For those who, I love this, for those who routinely benefit from privilege, the challenge is to not quickly deny its existence. It's important to recognize privilege as part of the reality that helps some while it impedes others' experience. And I'm so glad you said that, Sharon, because my experience, it's a mix of like a lack of privilege and privilege then that's led me to volunteering. And you know, part of that's appreciation and awareness of others. And there's just so many lessons. Like that's just the start. It's not something to tick off, is it? It's something that you start on a journey of, and just helps with your understanding of who your crew is and who you're trying to talk to as well, doesn't it? Now, I just want to thank all three of you so much for creating this conversation. I found it so uplifting, and I hope you've enjoyed yourselves. Anyone? A lot of enjoyment? Terrible time? Middle? Hey, all right. Hey, thank you so much. And yeah, I hope everyone's taking care of themselves out there, and good luck with your projects, everybody. And thank you again so much.
Thank you, Luke.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.